Hi, I'm Matt Barry, and this is Low Budget Visions, where we celebrate personal DIY independent filmmaking. I have the pleasure of being joined today by Ken Hess. Ken is an experimental filmmaker who generally likes to push boundaries and buttons with both original and found footage. There is always a point to his films, but often the point is sarcasm scented. Ken is also a technology writer and journalist, podcaster, and director of the Experimental Film Fest in New Bern, North Carolina. Ken, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to be on here. I don't know what else to say about that. I've this is our this was our fifth year with the Experimental Film Fest, and I've been making experimental films for about 20 years now. And gosh, technology writing, technology author, podcaster. I do a lot of different things, but my primary job is actually I'm an IT guy and have been for a long time. I work with Linux and Windows and other things. And I do a lot of AWS, Amazon Web Services instances and system administration. But one of the big things I do, moonlighting or freelance, is technology writing. So anyway, I guess that's about all.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned before we started this call, I'm a big fan of your experimental film podcast. I think you're doing a lot of great work in bringing those conversations with so many different filmmakers out, and really kind of getting them down, getting them out there. I think it's really opened up a lot of interesting things to think about in the world of experimental film. And of course, you've got the Experimental Film Fest that you're running as well. And am I correct that that just wrapped up? Is that correct?
Yeah, we just had it last weekend, September 21st, and it was a lot of fun. Of course, it's a lot of work organizing something like that. So it's, uh, every year I think, gosh, maybe this year will be better. And it was, because we actually had help. I had paid help this year, a brother and sister who are children of a friend of mine. And they were, man, they were super duper. They were perfect. And, the film festival is one of the most popular local events here in New Bern. And, New Bern's a small town, about 30,000 people. We had a full house at the Bank of the Arts, had about 65 people or so. And then we had four filmmakers show up from all over, two from the Raleigh Durham area, one from the New York City area, or New York State, sorry, and then one from Canada. The From Canada was Cassidy Siviero, and Cassidy won the Critics' Choice Award. So that was kind of cool to have a diverse mix of folks come in for the festival. It's always a good time to have filmmakers there to speak to people and network with each other. We had a little networking beer afterwards, after the film festival, and I got to speak with them one on one, so that was really cool.
That's nice. And how many editions of the festival have you held so far?
This was our fifth year. In fact, we just opened submissions today, October 1st, um, for season six. So I think we have about 10 films already submitted.
Well, it's great to hear. There's been a lot of it sounds like a lot of interest building in it, and in the years since you started it.
Yeah, I think, a lot of people are skittish and a little standoffish about new festivals, but I think once you hit the 5 year mark, people really pick up and start submitting because they realize you're going to be there. A lot of festivals kind of fizzle after the first couple of years, but we've hung in there. The very first year we had it was during the pandemic, so we were scheduled in early April of 2020, and then the pandemic happened, and we had to reschedule for June when they opened things back up in Tulsa, where we started. And we had about 20 people show up that year, and I'm surprised it was that many, knowing that we all had to stay distant and mass, except when we were having food and drink, but we were all really far apart. Thank goodness the room was big. So, you know, there were no issues from that.
I'd say 20 people is a good turnout, especially for the first year and under the circumstances. I mean, I imagine there were a lot of people who were eager to kind of get back in watching films together and sharing their work. So it sounds like it was a very welcome event, and it's only grown from there, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. We grew from 20 or so, and last year was standing room only in the Bank of the Arts. The Bank of the Arts is a pretty small venue. I think their maximum capacity is probably 80 or so. So we were really full last year. And this year, like I said, I think we had about 65. I'll have to go through the exact count, but I think that was about right. But the strange thing is not only are we one of the few exclusively experimental film festivals in the world, we're also, I believe, one of the largest. Um, Even at 65 or 70 attendees, um, that's pretty big for experimental because experimental is kind of niche. It's weird. A lot of people don't understand it. And I think they're getting used to it here in New Bern because this is our fourth year here in New Bern to have it. And it's a good time. We have about 20 to 25 films every year. We have the filmmakers actually do a short uh, film to introduce themselves and their film to the audience because the first year we just showed the films one right after the other with no context and it was a little rough. And people said, hey, we need some context. We'd like a little bit of information. So I told everybody who was an official selection that now they have to create a 1 to 2 minute video introducing themselves in the film. And it really works out because it helps introduce the person behind the film for sure. And then it also gives them context as to why the person made the film. So I think it's really cool to have those little intros.
It really is. And it's one of the things I've enjoyed about your podcast as well, is kind of offering the artists a chance to talk about their work and to hear about their intentions and their ideas behind making it. I'd like to actually talk with you more about the film festival in just a minute, but before we get to that, I wanted to sort of ask if you could describe a little bit about your own background in filmmaking, how you came to make films, and also um, your relationship with experimental film specifically.
Sure. Yeah, when I was a kid, I ran around with a camera all the time. It was one of the ones I remember most was a Kodak X15, which is a crummy little camera with a flash cube on the top. And, you got four flashes uh, with a little cube. It would rotate. And I was always taking pictures. And even back then, at least for us, because we weren't rich, film development, you'd send your film off. You usually take it, well, we took it in my small hometown, took it to the drugstore. They mailed it off. And about a week later, it would come back. I think later on, when I was in high school, you could actually just send it directly to someone. And so, um, it was still several dollars to get that done and, to buy the film. But I still have a bunch of those pictures left. And I'm so proud I actually took those and we had them developed and they used to print pictures instead of just doing them digitally. So I have all that physical media, and like I said, it was a lot of fun. And then I discovered film because my stepfather gave me one year a projector. It was an 8 millimeter projector, and he gave me, I think, about 10 8 millimeter films with it. And I used to show those in my room all the time. I would watch them, and I was just fascinated because I think one of the things that was so weird, because I was a photography buff back then, is that each frame is actually just a picture. And that's why they call them moving pictures or motion pictures, because each frame, it's kind of like one of those flip books. You draw a picture, you make a little movement, and you flip through it, and it looks like it's moving. So I was fascinated by that when I was a kid, these 8 millimeter films, because I could actually see the progression of what was going on. And I was always been kind of nuts over cartoons and so forth. So that's how I got into being interested in filmmaking, is by watching those little 8 millimeter films. And then later on, I got my own 8 millimeter film camera. I wish I still had it, but I have a couple of them around here that I still mess with. But man, it's really expensive these days. I mean, way more than it was back then. I thought it was expensive then to get film developed, but now it's crazy. I mean, for a 2.5 or 3 minute reel, I think it's almost $100. I think you buy the roll, get it developed, and by the time you get your scan back, it's about $100 per roll. So
Yeah,
you
I've
have to
had
be
it.
very frugal when you press the button.
Yeah, for sure. I've had a similar experience shooting 16 millimeter. A few years ago, I had purchased a Bolex camera and got into that for a bit. But the yes, the cost was prohibitive for shooting anything extensively. So I certainly understand. And but getting back to your experience with the 8 millimeter films, is that was really your introduction then to filmmaking?
Yeah, it was back then. And then for years I dropped it because work, and I got kind of obsessed with the work I was doing because I started as a chemist, and then I transitioned to IT in the mid 1990s, and kind of dropped filmmaking for a while because it was so expensive and so difficult on film. To make your own films, you had to have a splicer, or you had to have some equipment. Those I can't remember what they're called now. Anyway, they scanned the film, and you could uh, do multiple exposures, and anyway, some kind of a printer. But anyway, I never had access to that kind of stuff. And so I dropped it for years and then picked it back up when high eight cameras came out. And high eight cameras have a little film cartridge. And what's cool about those is when you make a film, you can view it immediately. So it's almost a digital recording. It's still analog, but you can run it back and watch what you just filmed. So that was cool. And it's a lot easier to edit. And so then I transitioned into mini DV. I still have a couple of mini DV cameras. And, in fact, my very first film that's actually on, well, my first, I call it my modern film. It's actually on YouTube on my channel. It's called Big Break. I filmed that with two um, mini DV cameras and edited that. And man, filmmaking has come a long way with digital.
Yeah,
So
I
yeah,
mean,
that's how I got in.
that's good. That's great. I mean, I agree with you absolutely that the technology has just improved even since I got into it in the 90s, shooting on, analog video. And then I remember when mini DV appeared, and that opened up all sorts of possibilities for mainly for editing. I found that was really the big thing was with
Yeah,
post-production, nonlinear editing, the software that really opened up a lot of doors, a lot of possibilities. But no, that's great to hear, how it sounds like you got into filmmaking at an early age and then, really have kind of come back to it with digital technology. And um, in that time, I mean, it sounds like your earlier work was more, a bit more narrative, and then you kind of have moved towards experimental. Is that accurate?
yeah, that's right. In fact, my very well, it's not my first film, but the first one I put online, the Big Break one. It's extremely narrative. It's about this comedian who, well, he's actually a janitor, and he wants to be a comedian because he works as a janitor in a comedy club. And he kind of daydreams about uh, being a successful comedian on stage, and so that's how the whole thing. It was his big break to get to go on uh, the stage. But it was pretty cool. The guy who was the star of the film, Jason Emmert, um, he was a local actor there in Tulsa, and I hired him to do this, and he thought it was pretty funny. And so we filmed it at the Looney Bin Comedy Club in Tulsa. And he unfortunately, strangely enough, he was a young guy. He passed away in 2017, about 10 years after we made the movie. And I didn't know because he had actually gone to New York to be a comedian, to do tours and stuff and to be a real comedian. And he told me goodbye when he left to go to New York. And he was really good. And he actually used a couple of the jokes from the film in his own comedy act. I told him, I said, yes, please take them because I'll never do anything with them. And so he did. And he goes, the one joke that you would see in the film, he goes, man, that kills every time. So I was happy about that.
I'm curious if you found as your filmmaking kind of evolved or transitioned towards experimental, were you kind of aware of that at the time, or was it something that you sort of found like looking back after a few films that your work had taken this direction?
That's interesting because it was totally accidental that I became interested in experimental film. In fact, I just thought I was a weirdo. I just thought I liked bizarre things. I didn't realize there was even a thing as experimental film because I love to watch old films, especially from the 1920s and 30s and some silent films from the teens, Charlie Chaplin and some of those guys. And I didn't realize that a lot of what they did was experimental. And now it's mainstream, pans and zooms and moving the camera with like a person that's walking. You pick up the camera and you move it because it was really hard back then to do that because cameras were so much larger. And early on, they had the cranks, you know. So I became interested in experimental film kind of by accident. And I looked at some of my old footage. And sometimes I even look back at some of my old footage and think, wow, that was totally experimental. I mean, I had no clue that was even a thing, but it's what has always appealed to me. I never liked, excuse me, I never particularly liked telling regular stories. It's just how my mind works. I don't necessarily think linearly, beginning, middle, end. Sometimes I start in the middle. It's just like I do with conversations. Sometimes I'll have a pre-conversation in my head and just start talking with someone, and I go, I need to catch up. Where did this come from? So it's just kind of my mental structure gravitates towards experimental, and that's not for everybody. I mean, some people in experimental film do experimental documentary, which does have more of an order to it, or it can, or experimental horror films, or I mean, experimental is very broad. It's hard to say that there's, well, it's impossible to say that there's one way to do anything in experimental films. So I would say I got into it quite by accident because I didn't know that there was such thing. And then once I discovered it, probably 15 or so years ago, I realized that's where I am, experimental.
I think you make an interesting point here because there are, of course, as you say, so many different types of experimental films. And I think for a lot of people, maybe who are just being introduced to film or even specifically to experimental film, they encounter certain, very celebrated works of experimental film that are in particular styles, particular modes of experimental filmmaking, and they may not even be aware of all the different ways that experimental techniques can be applied. Like you said, there's experimental documentary, there's experimental narratives, and so on, and so many different kinds of ways, so many different kinds of approaches. And I wonder sometimes if filmmakers who, kind of like yourself, you're saying you didn't feel like you fit quite in with like the traditional classical narrative filmmaking. And then, but you really weren't even aware that experimental film existed. You kind of found yourself just moving into that naturally, pursuing your own interests.
Right.
So I think it makes me wonder, how many filmmakers, might not even be aware of that experimental film exists, or they don't, that they see, a very particular type of experimental film and aren't aware of all the different ways that those techniques can be applied. So that's an interesting thing to think about. I'm curious if you had any, as you've moved into the experimental uh, approach to filmmaking, if there's any filmmakers who you've found particularly interesting, maybe influential, who have inspired you in some way.
Oh yeah. Jean-Luc Godard is one of them. The French New Wave. I have Criterion Channel on my television. So Roku or smart TVs, whatever they're called these days. Anyway, I have the Criterion Channel, and there's a whole Jean-Luc Godard, um, almost like a sub channel in there. There's groups of films, and I've watched um, a, a bunch of his, and I love those, and Jacques Tati as well.
Oh yeah.
And Mon Uncle is one of my favorites. And these guys that, like I say, the French New Wave, it really captures my attention. I like that a lot. I mean, some people think it's a little too random, but I like that. Like I said, I don't think linearly a lot of times, and so that really appeals to me when those kinds of filmmakers come up. What's his name? Quentin Tarantino. Nonlinear is like his thing, and I love it. Pulp Fiction was inspirational to me because I thought finally there's someone who you know that understands that. I would like to talk to him sometime. I know some people don't particularly care for him. They like his films, I guess, but anyway, I would like to sit down and talk to him. I'd like to have dinner with him sometime.
I'm sure it'd be fascinating
But
to
yeah,
hear.
those
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, but those are some of the big influences. There are some classic experimental filmmakers who are inspirational, but those guys are the ones who, when I watch films, those are the ones I generally pick.
Mhm. Yeah, you mentioned Jacques Tati. He's such an interesting example of just how funny films can, experimental techniques can be in a film. And you mentioned Mon Oncle specifically, and I love what he does with sound and uh, the way that he finds to be so creative with sound and just the way he frames these shots. I remember there's the scene in that film where the kids are watching passersby. They're up on a hill watching these passersby, and there's a lamppost, I think, and at the last second they distract them by whistling or something, and the pedestrians turn and walk into that lamppost, and it's just such
Mm,
a brilliantly constructed scene visually and with the sound and everything happening at once, and you see it all in a single shot. And I always love that moment. It might be my favorite gag in the movie when he's it goes into the kitchen in that house, the kind of futuristic house,
yeah,
and
I love that house.
yeah, and he's getting a glass out of the cupboard, and he drops it, and it just bounces back, and then he's fascinated by this, and then he reaches in and takes out another glass and drops it, and that one shatters. So
Yeah,
I love how he
yeah,
he plays with all those techniques of sound and composition, these wide shots, and there's so much to love about his films. And of course, you mentioned Godard, who I think so many people find inspiring. Um, I was actually just speaking with somebody recently about this, and I said that to me, uh, if I had to try to name two people in film who have probably been more influential in all sorts of ways with film history, it would be Godard and Jonas Mekas. I think that both
yeah,
of them, and I'm talking not even necessarily just as filmmakers, but just as thinkers about film, as in their way of conceptualizing what film can be. I think that they have both of those filmmakers have just had such a profound influence in the last half century or more at this point. And yeah, I think you're right. The French New Wave is an endless source of inspiration for so many people. Um, Do you have any, I'm just curious, do you have any particular favorite Godard films that really stand out to you?
Yeah, is it called? It's Jean Seberg is the star. She's
Oh,
an
Breathless.
American. I'm sorry, Breathless.
Breathless?
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's unbelievable. I love the way she looks on camera. Unfortunately, she took her own life, but she was such a great actor. I love the way she looked on camera and the way I mean, she really, the camera loved her, as they say. She was gorgeous. And I love the way she spoke French because she spoke it in such a way that I could understand. You know, most people are, you know, so fast and they slang so much and slur so much. But her French was really impeccable and she spoke it at a pace that I could actually understand. So it's a pleasure to watch movies with her in it. And I think Tati really liked her. I'm sorry, Godard really liked her because she was so good on camera. And she would just do anything, you know, because the way they made films is he would basically give them a kind of an outline of a script every day. They never knew what they were going to be doing every day. And you know, he would just hand them an outline and talk them through whatever they were doing. And so they just kind of it was almost ad lib at the time. So anyway, I'm just fascinated by the whole technique and the way she was on camera. It's unfortunate that she can't still be with us because I'd like to interview her.
Yeah, she certainly was iconic in that film. I mean, and the way that Godard filmed her and filmed the whole movie. I mean, the whole thing was just this. I mean, it really is, one of those films you can say is iconic. I think it's just
Yeah,
it really stands out. Um, I wanted to just say real quick because I find this really interesting, hearing about your own filmmaking trajectory from narrative to experimental. One of the reasons I find it interesting, and one of the things I mean, I have heard you speak a bit about that on your own podcast as well. And one of the things I find interesting about that is how it kind of, I've kind of found myself going in a similar path. And it's that same move from narrative and not even making a conscious decision to do it, but just finding that, I've kind of gone into this, more, for me at least, an experimental direction, sort of leaving behind more traditional narrative approaches and techniques. And I'm curious if one of the things that you've found for yourself is, do you find it kind of freeing not to have to worry about, all the rules and all of the expectations that come with traditional narrative film?
yeah, I think so. I'm not. I don't know when I'm direct a film and when I'm filming because most of the time I have to do my own work. I get caught up in what I'm seeing rather than you know, like the rule of thirds or you know shadows and certain things. I just tend to go with what I'm feeling at the time, not necessarily all these techniques and worrying about rules and things. I think you need to know the rules. I really do. I think you need to know the rule of thirds, and you need to know about the golden hour, the blue hour. I think you need to know about um, you know um, balance in your shots. I think you need to know those things just as a filmmaker, just to hold a camera and know what you're doing. But I think sometimes those things are meant to be broken. They're meant to be put to the side to make a point or to give the person a different feeling. Like if you're interviewing somebody, you're supposed to put them over like this and have them look like this, you know, documentary style, instead of right in the center or way over here like this, where they're like, you know, about to fall off the front of the screen.
Right.
So, you know, there's some rules like that, but that can be very effective in experimental film to put someone, you know, really far to one side or really low in the frame. I mean, it depends on what you're trying to get across. And, you know, some experimental filmmakers do those kinds of things. And like I said before, whatever is experimental today is mainstream tomorrow. A lot of the stuff that was experimental becomes mainstream. And you'll see some of those techniques and some of those rule breaks in narrative films, even blockbusters.
Yeah, and I also think I think you make a good point about how the experimental techniques can be kind of subsumed into the mainstream and become more conventional. I mean, Tarantino is a great example of that with Pulp Fiction, the nonlinear linear narrative becoming it was pretty groundbreaking when he did it, and that was in a still in a pretty mainstream commercial film, and now it's only become it's been done more and more, but it's it's so true. So many of the techniques that show up in movies. I mean, Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey being a great example, that some of the films you can see earlier experimental films that influenced some of those techniques. And of course, even when Kubrick was doing it, it was still pretty groundbreaking. And I think even 50, almost what, 60 years later, it's still very groundbreaking, even though a lot of it
Yeah.
has become it has become more accepted, I guess, in the mainstream commercial cinema. I'm you know, one of the things I find interesting, and I've been thinking a lot about this myself. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts. When we talk about experimental film, I think often it uh, falls under the much larger umbrella of independent filmmaking, in the sense that these are not films that are commissioned by a studio. They're not commissioned usually for even commercial purposes. I'm curious if you find with these terms, like independent or indie film and experimental film, do you find them? I guess my first question would be, what distinctions do you make if you were talking about these films and you said, independent films versus experimental? I guess my first question is, what distinction do you make between those? And then going off of that, do you find those kinds of terms and labels helpful in thinking about the films and conceptualizing them?
Yeah, I think those terms are helpful. In fact, I used to watch in the 1990s, I watched a lot of Hal Hartley films on the IFC, Independent Film Channel. And I was glued to it all the time, like I'm glued to TCM now. Um, but IFC was a place I always went because I knew that there was nobody telling these guys what they're supposed to be doing. That you didn't have a studio breathing down your neck. You've got to film this, you've got to get this in the can in 10 days or whatever. They just kind of filmed when people were available. Um, Parker Posey was in some of those films, and Adrian Shelley, and a lot of people who are now extremely famous were indie film actors at the time. And so, yeah, I like the term independent because it means freedom, I think. And I like that a lot. I like that's not to say I don't enjoy blockbusters and mainstream film, but I think independent is, I don't know, underground and independent. It just, I don't know, there's something romantic about those. Uh, I don't know, maybe I'm a little too sentimental about that, but I really enjoy that guerrilla filmmaking and run and gun, shoot from the hip, and let's do whatever makes sense. If this side of the building has too many shadows on it, let's move to the other side instead of getting big reflectors out and lights and stuff. You just have to make do with what you have, and I like that. There's something really organic about that.
Yeah, it's so true. I agree completely, and it's very inspiring as well, because at the end of the day, you want to get your movie made. You want to get it out. You want to get your ideas out there, get the work out there. And, yeah, if you're waiting for that big break to come from a studio to come and, grant your wish and cut you that big check and give you that, limitless budget, I mean, you might be waiting a very long time. So, yeah, I think one of the great things with experimental film specifically is that you can get to a point where you let go of some of the commercial expectations that come with with the expectations that come with trying to make a commercial film, and so often I think even in the independent film world that can be a consideration if you're trying to sell the film or make some money off of it, there is that concern about, even in that smaller scale, you're still dealing with some of those questions. But I personally, I feel like experimental film is a chance to throw, all of those considerations to the wind and just do whatever you want, and it's just pure expression and freedom, as you said. Um, I wanted to before we go on, I wanted to actually, if we can just shift gears just a little bit, I'd like to talk about some of your films specifically and to go through some of the titles. I'd like to make sure we talk about these and let people know about them. Now, I'm going to, just for reference, I'm looking at your Vimeo page,
Sure.
and I thought we could just go through a few of these if you want to share any thoughts on them, any comments, anything significant about them to you, anything about the making of them that you would think might be interesting. One of the first one I watched here on Vimeo was called Tragedy. Would you like to talk about that one?
Yeah, that's one of my favorites, by the way. And I just updated it. I found a soundbite I wanted to add to it. But yeah, Tragedy is gosh, it's an experimental film, and I love black and white, so most of my stuff is black and white. Um, it's experimental black and white film that uses some collage techniques, and it kind of chronicles different tragedies. The very first one is a lady who calls 911, and she's on top of her car. She's driven into a creek that's overflowed on the road. She calls 911, and she's really scared, as she should be, because she drove into this rising, rushing water, and she's on her cell phone with 911, and the 911 operator is rude, and she's terrible, and she tells her, I don't know how you could have seen it. You ran right into it. And, she goes, I don't want to die. And she goes, you're not going to die. But the lady does die. Believe it or not, that lady who called that 911 call, she ended up drowning. So I don't know how the 911 operator reconciles that, or if she got fired, or what happened to her. But she was extremely negligent, in my opinion, and it was horrible. But anyway, then the second part is you hear Buzz Aldrin calling out the landing on the moon in, when the very first moon landing, and he's saying like 16 down, 2 across, or however he says it, and he's just he's giving feedback to the pilot uh, about their landing speeds, because you had to have a certain vertical landing speed and horizontal speed to land safely without breaking the legs off the lander. So he's talking about that, and then it it morphs into the very first Apollo mission, and it blew up. There was a fire in the cockpit, and you hear the guy screaming, "There's a fire in the cockpit," and so that's a tragedy. And then it morphs into Trump talking about COVID, and he's just saying random stuff like, and all through the film you hear him saying nobody really knows, because there's all this doubt, like the lady drowning, and so on. But anyway, he's talking about COVID, and he says it could be worse, it could get better, nobody really knows. That's when you know where that nobody really knows comes from. And then it changes into the some cities are burning. I think that might be in Ukraine. I'm not sure. I can't remember where I got that footage from now, but I use a lot of found footage. And you hear Trump again saying something about it's happening in the cities everywhere, and because there was lots of talk about the protests and stuff, and the cities are burning. What was it? Portland is burning, and so on. And I was in Tulsa during one of those protests, and it was overblown. There was really not much happening. So anyway, it was a lot of exaggeration. And then at the very end, you see this couple standing there, just kind of in disbelief, listening to all this. And the girl in front of them, at first, she says, um, how or what. I can't remember which one it is. Anyway, every time he says nobody really knows, she goes, "What? What?" And then you hear Trump again saying, "They're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats." And somebody made a song out of it, but I just used the original sound bite from it. And finally, the two people at the very end just kind of look at each other and look back at the camera and like, you know, and that's it. So
I like
anyway,
the way you,
tragedy. It's
yeah, I like the way you bring all that together though with the sound bites and the use of the found footage, which I know you mentioned in your biography is kind of a recurring technique that you use. I also wanted to ask you about one that intrigued me called Road Work Ahead, which I just want to say
oh,
to me kind of evoked the aesthetic of like an 8 millimeter home movie. It had a very evocative quality to it because of that. I don't know if you want to share any comments about that film.
sure, yeah. Road Work Ahead. That was actually taken in Tulsa, very close to the where we lived. There's an elementary school close by, and they had done all this road work, and they just left all the signs because when they declared a shutdown, everybody went home, and so there was all these road signs left there, all along the road. And they had just freshly asphalted that 57th Street, which is what that street is, and you can actually see that it's fresh asphalt. And then I walked down the entire sidewalk, which is probably a quarter of a mile or so from the where the original road signs were to the end, where I stopped and turned around and went back to the elementary school. But it was so weird because this was in March of 2020, and everything was abandoned. There was a couple of cars that went by, but I mean, the school grounds were abandoned. In
Mhm.
fact, there were, I don't know if it's in the film or not, I can't remember if there was caution tape around the playground equipment that had been kind of torn down. But to me, it was the loneliest place in the world because usually at that time of day, there were all these kids out there playing. And, there was just nothing there. And what I thought was really cool too is um, they have those benches there and they're called buddy benches. And I guess I don't know if you felt uh, bullied or whatever, you're supposed to go sit on the buddy bench and somebody was supposed to sit with you. And then they had all these inspirational basketball hoops. And each one of those basketball goals, they say something inspirational on it, like um, good work, keep going, play hard, all that stuff. And then the very last one that I zoom in on that you can see very plainly, I think it says work hard. I can't remember. But anyway, to me, it just all kind of came together because, um, you know, it was a really lonely time. And then, uh, road work ahead because there was nothing going on. And all that stuff had just been left there. And I think there was a porta potty that the workmen used that had been turned on its side. And what's really, if you turn up the sound pretty loud, you can actually hear me breathing on that because I'm walking back up the hill and I'm like, and I sound like I'm out of breath, but I'm also, it's a little bit of a panic because I'm thinking it's just so weird. And I couldn't even imagine what was going to happen to us because this was very early on. This was like in the first week of the pandemic when we were in lockdown, and I didn't know what to think. I don't think anybody did, but I was really worried, and I just had to get outside. And I had my camera with me, and I just started filming, and that's where, and that's when that film is actually one that I filmed and then forgot about it for. I think I just posted that um, just a few months ago, but I had lost it, and then I rediscovered it in some of my archives. Decided to post it.
Nice. Yeah, I've as I mentioned, I had watched most of the films, and I thought Laments of the Soul had some particularly striking imagery. Again, very much, um, you know, very much creating a mood. I mean, to me, it was very much a mood piece. I thought the Une Belle Journée was funny. I thought it had a nice sense of humor about it. I think the style was very effective that you used to evoke that kind of kind of classic, French film, and then where you went with it was in a very, I thought, a very funny direction. I thought that really worked nicely. You want to mention, first of all, let me just give you an opportunity. Did you want to say anything about either of those films, just while we're on the subject?
Oh yeah, and Belle Journée, that one was pretty cool because what the actor in that, Louisa Vitsorik, she's actually from Berlin, and she was visiting New Bern because she had spent at least a year or so of her high school years here with a friend of mine who hosted her as an exchange student. And so she came over from Berlin to actually do a film with him. Bill Hand, he's another local filmmaker here in New Bern, and I help out on a lot of his productions. So he had her at a coffee shop, and they were filming August Strindberg's The Stronger, which is a strange play in itself because it's one person just speaking the whole time, and Louisa was the person speaking the whole time. The other person is just completely silent. They never say a word. They just make faces and stuff. Well, I asked her after watching her in this, I thought, man, this lady is good, really good. She's a professional actor. So I asked her, I said, do you like to do crazy? She goes, oh, I love to do crazy. And she speaks perfect English, perfect German, and pretty darn good French, as you can see. But I said, well, I've got this crazy script. And she goes, let me have it. So I gave her the script Monday afternoon. Okay. Monday afternoon after we finished, uh, after we wrapped that project at the coffee shop. Thursday morning, about 9:30, I guess, we filmed Une Belle Journée. We filmed it just a block from my house down by the uh, Trent River or Lawson's Creek, whatever you call it, down here by the historical center. And so she knew all the dialogue without having to look back at the script. She knew all the movements. She knew all the direction. She knew everything on the script. She had memorized this entire script in French. And, all I had to show her was where I wanted her to be. And, I had the props with me and she just went with it. And man, it's so great to work. As an experimental filmmaker, you don't work with actors all that much, depending on the kind of films you make. But holy cow, I loved working with her. So anyway, I have to mention her because she's really good. And then, yeah, that was a fun piece. I don't know where I got that idea. I thought of it one day. I think because we visited some town and they had painted their fire hydrants to look like people, with little hats and the arms are out. Anyway, I just thought it was funny, so I came up with that. And then Laments of the Soul is one of, gosh, I get kind of teary eyed every time I think about that one because what it is, it's a film that says there are some things you can touch and some things you can never touch and some things you can only touch once and they're changed forever. So, there, see, I can't even talk about the film. So that's how, thought provoking and emotion provoking those kinds of things are. And so, I use some collage techniques to demonstrate and try and evoke some feeling out of that. Like one of my favorite shots in that is the snail is slowly crossing in front of the camera, and the guy puts his finger down, and it looks like he breaks the antenna of the snail. And that's changed forever. Then he disappears. Then it kind of morphs into other things. But anyway, yeah, that one is Laments of the Soul. It's about basically losing time, you know, and so every moment is precious. We've, I don't know.
It was a
I can't
beautiful
talk
film.
about it too much, or I'm not gonna be able to talk.
Sure. No, it was
But
a beautiful
anyway, yeah.
film.
But they were, they're both very different films. Laments of the Soul is totally found footage, and it just has a song. Lock. It's from Lock Me. It's the Flower Duet. Da, 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 that song. But anyway, I like that a lot.
Going through your just a couple of other titles I wanted to mention, I thought Railroaded was interesting as kind of a protest film. That was another very very powerful film there. And one other I was curious about. It looks like it was an older film. I want to make sure I get the title correct here. So excuse me while I look for the. Oh yes, Privilege Escalation. That was
Oh
an
yeah,
interesting one. It reminded me, I just have to say real quick with that escalator as like the central image and people going up. It reminded me of a film I had just seen a while ago by Standish Lauder called Necrology. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this,
mm,
but
yep,
it's yeah, the people they're going. I think actually they were photographed coming down the escalator in Grand Central Station, and I believe he like reversed the film, so they're going up like passing by the camera and that was just when I saw the escalator and the people that was what immediately came to mind to me was that striking image. I'm not sure if you have anything to say about that, but I just wanted to mention it. I thought it was an interesting movie.
yeah. That one I took at the I think it was either MoMA or the Metropolitan in New York, and I don't remember what year that was. Maybe it was 2015, or I don't know. I can't remember for sure. But we were there, and I was trying to get all of New York I could at the time, and so I just had my film going. I had my camera going, and the whole time through the museum, I was just carrying it next to me, and I got a lot of from the hip shots. But that one, I was waiting, excuse me, for my wife to come out of the restroom, and I just sat down. I mean, I just sat right on the floor and just held my camera. And as people were walking by, some people would look at me, and think, what the heck is this guy doing? And I pretended I was just looking at something on my camera. That's how I like to get a lot of candid shots as well. When I was in San Francisco, I took a bunch of candid shots like that because there were some really interesting people there. And so I would pretend I was just looking at my camera, how you can go through pictures and stuff. And then, of course, being a Canon camera, it was really, really loud. So it wasn't so subtle, but, they didn't know for sure. But yeah, privilege escalation was just, I really loved the high contrast black and white look at that. I was trying to do kind of a Fellini-esque thing there. So anyway, that was interesting. And what was the other one you mentioned?
Oh, the Railroaded, the protest
Oh,
film.
Railroad. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I actually made that piece for a friend of mine who's the local director of the art gallery where I show my have the film festival.
Hmm.
He runs a place called Shop Class, and they do woodworking and welding and all kinds of really cool stuff there. And he teaches it. Plus, you can go there and build projects. Well, the railroad track runs pretty close to it, and they were claiming that they owned some of the land or had rights of some of the land, and I don't know, it was a big deal. And so he did exactly what I would have done. He created a protest art show for a fundraiser, and basically the railroad just wanted money, and so I made that for his protest art show. I'm not sure if he used it or not because we were out of town at the unfortunately the day it happened. But yeah, that's why the girl is saying things like there's you don't have a need. It's just greed on your part or whatever. And she's actually under the train as the train is going over, and you hear uh, Johnny Cash saying part of that song. I hear a train a coming. So there's some layers to it, but it's really a protest film. I love protest art. And if you've listened to the podcast, I love protest art and protest film. So anyway, um, that was that was what that was for. I thought it was pretty effective. I mean, it
Yeah.
kind of got the point across. So
Yes, and last but certainly not least here, I wanted to ask you about two films that you have in distribution through the Filmmakers Co-op. I
mm,
watched Dirt. I thought was an interesting juxtaposition of, the person of the process of, really of digging into the ground and, the between the person and then the technology of the backhoe digging and then the look like a little groundhog burrowing in there, kind of superimposed, intercut and superimposed on top of each other.
mm,
Um, and then the landscape, the call is real, which was I found
mm.
extremely powerful, extremely you know yeah. I wanted to ask you about both of those quickly here, but I also wanted to
Sure.
ask if there was a particular um, motivation, particular reason that you had chosen to put these two titles into distribution through the Filmmakers Co-op.
Yeah. Well, Dirt is, well, I consider that to be a groundbreaking film. You need to put a rim shot in right
Right.
there. If you watch it, you'll know what I mean. But anyway, that one um, I just thought was really cool. I love the visuals, plus the message behind it is that, and there's actually a message to this one. Um, no matter what you try to do, there's always somebody working against you. Somebody's always undoing what you're doing. If you notice in the film, the groundhog is digging and someone else is digging, and they overlap each other. Somebody's digging a hole and then somebody's filling it in. And at the end, and there's some really cool shots in here. But towards the end, there's a guy digging a hole, and his hand movements are sort of coordinated with the groundhog. He goes like this, and then the groundhog looks that way. Then he goes like this, and the groundhog looks that way. It just happened to work out that way. I mean, when I saw his hand movements, I thought, hey, that groundhog, if I can get the timing right, and it did work out. So, but there's some cool stuff like that in there. Like when the guy is taking the shovel, it looks like he's actually moving that backhoe with the shovel. There's just some cool stuff about that. I really love that film. But that's the reason why I submitted that one to the Filmmakers Co-op,
Yeah.
just because it's so cool. And then Landscape, the call is real. That one, that's the one I submitted, and I won quite a few awards with that one. And that is a real 911 call. This 17-year-old boy, Jake Evans, kills his mother and his sister, and he calls 911. And it's near Fort Worth, Texas, which is pretty close to my hometown. And the lady comes on, Parker County 911. Where's your emergency? And the kid goes, my house. And you can tell he's 17 because he's so calm and cool about everything. He's not hysterical, and he's so matter of fact. And he goes, I guess this is going to affect me pretty negatively. And it's like, yeah, you just killed two people, dude, your family. Yeah, it's quite emotional, and I sped that up. The original call was 26 minutes long, and I got it down to 10 and a half minutes by removing all the silence and pauses and stuff, so it's more conversational. And then the footage, strangely enough, was taken pretty close to Wilmington, North Carolina, at what they call Paradise Island or Carolina Beach. There's a little boardwalk there with an amusement park. And the reason why it happened, I went out to get something for my wife and child the night we were staying in this little hotel near there. I took my camera with me because I wanted to get some pictures of the amusement park because, night and all the lights and stuff. And as I was filming the Ferris wheel, I heard someone say, I'm going to call 911 about this. I go, hey, there's an idea for the audio. Wouldn't it be cool to have audio, something extremely tragic and something extremely fun, like an amusement park, and in the zoo shots, which was in Columbia, South Carolina, um, because that's what a 17-year-old kid should be doing. They should be in an amusement park, you know, on rides and having fun, or at a zoo, looking at animals and stuff rather than killing their family members. So the visuals were supposed to be different than what you were hearing. It's supposed to be an extreme, excuse me, it's supposed to be an extreme to your mind that, you're hearing this horrible thing, but you're seeing, whack-a-mole and, the prizes kind of going back and forth in the wind, and, but the visuals actually mean something, especially when there's a snake from the zoo, and he says something about being evil, and so you see the snake, and he says something about his father. He doesn't want to talk to his father, and the gorilla turns its back at that time. So the timing on those things is no accident. So um, like I said, there's meaning in everything I do. Sometimes I'm poking fun at people. Sometimes I'm trying to get a little bit of a jab at something. But there's always a kind of a message in all my films. It's not always nice, but it's always there.
Well, yeah, certainly it was a really powerful juxtaposition there of the sound and images, which I found to be the case in really all of the films of yours that I watched. I wanted to ask you, I know we're running a little tight on time here, and I appreciate you
Okay.
sticking with me here. I had a question I wanted to ask you about, because you've done so much to support experimental film between, I mean, you're making your films and you've got the film fest and your podcast. I wanted to just to kind of shift gears just a little bit to talking a question I had about the film festival. Um, could you just, tell us briefly anything you'd like to share about the process of when you decided to start it and also kind of getting it off the ground? I mean, I know that must be an extremely involved story, but if there's anything just kind of briefly that you could share about the process, either that you learned from it that maybe you would suggest to somebody starting their own festival, or just things that you found, interesting about the process.
Right. Well, in fact, if you listen to the podcast, you'll know why I started it. I think I've talked about it on 2 or 3 episodes. It was started out of anger, but that's a whole other story. You have to listen to the podcast to get that. But what I have found out about running it is I have met so many cool people, because people who submit to the festival have been on the podcast. I've interviewed people who have not been associated with the festival at all. But I think that's one of the big things I really like about the festival is I get to meet a lot of really cool people. Experimental filmmakers are really smart people. They're often mathematicians, psychologists. I think there's lawyers, but they're really smart people. I mean, regardless of what their job or their chosen life path is, they're all really smart, and it's just incredible for me to get to know other people like this. So it's really that's been a really cool thing about it. Now, one of the things you have to know about running a festival, it's really really hard. I mean, it's an entire year of gathering submissions, responding to submitters, getting judges, to rate the films. You have to coordinate with them. You have to make sure that every film has, and this is just my thing, every film gets watched by at least 2 people, at least 2 judges. I know some film festivals, they have people, they'll give 30 films or 50 films to one judge, and they just judge that set, and that's only one person's perspective. And I don't think that's fair I mean, I understand if you get 7,000 submissions or something, you have to do something, but um, I think that every film needs to have multiple perspectives. And so generally, every film has been seen by at least two people, generally three or four. I think it's pretty rare that a film in my festival doesn't get watched by more people um, before it gets selected or not selected. So I mean, it's a process. The other thing I learned is it's a lot of hard work to put one on, and it's expensive because you have to secure a venue unless you own a building or someplace you can have it. Or if you make a deal with somebody. We have ours at the Bank of the Arts, which is a nonprofit entity, but it's still you know several $100s to rent the space for the evening and have staff available to help us. Um, you have to have people at the door to take tickets. You have to have someone help serve, help seat. We had to put out the chairs ourselves. You know, it's a bunch of work. I mean, you have to make posters and advertise, and I mean, it's a lot of work. Now, sure, it only happens once a year, but that's a really intense few days once a year. But like I said, it's work all year round, and because you have to work with Film Freeway and the website. You have to decide on deadlines. You have to decide prices for your submissions. You can't make them too low because you have to pay for your venue and so on. You have to make it a good experience for the people who come to the festival, and you have to make it a good experience for the filmmakers, which I try to do. I try to um, make it a really good experience for them because it's expensive to make films. It's expensive to submit to festivals, and so it's a lot of work, But I love it. I mean, it has to be a labor of love because you don't, at least I don't, make any money off of it because, as you might imagine, experimental film is pretty niche. Even though we're international, we get fewer than 300 submissions a year. So, or at least so far, I'd love to have more, but um, man, you know, because that would be really cool. The budget would allow me to do more stuff, maybe even have a second night, or an all-day film festival where we have blocks of different kinds of films that would allow me to have more efficient selections and so on. But we're limited because of submissions right now. Um, the other thing I've learned about stuff from hosting a festival is how much tastes vary in films. I mean, not everybody likes every film, of course. Not everybody likes um, protest films. I've had people walk out of the festival because there are protest films, and I don't judge the films myself. I have judges, and I trust them. I have kind of an international panel of judges, and I rotate people in and out every year. I try to get a diverse group of people from like 20 to 60 or so, whoever wants to judge. But I try to get diversity, not just all white males. I try to get women, other genders, different ages. I try to get a wide range of people to do the judging, and that's tough. It's hard to get people to do that. So I mean, it's a lot of work. That's one thing I've learned. So, but I do enjoy it because I love watching experimental film and experiencing the strange world through other people's eyes, I guess.
I know that you had recently, you mentioned that you had relocated from Tulsa to New Bern in North Carolina. Have you found the community there to be, engaged and supportive of the film festival?
Yeah, New Bern is very supportive of the arts. It's crazy. We have two, well, actually three. Sorry, we have three live action theaters here. We have Rivertown, which has its own theater space. We have the New Bern Civic Theater, and we have the New Bern or the North Carolina History Theater, and they perform in different places around. They don't have a set spot yet, but we have a bunch of art galleries. We have a lot of artists. Nicholas Sparks is from here, so we have literary. There's lots of writers here. In fact, I just met a fellow technology writer today. We're going to have coffee or lunch together here in a couple of days. So um, very supportive of the arts. We have a monthly art walk. I think it's the second Friday of every month. We have an art walk, and they're wanting me to do films. I'm going to project films on the side of this bank that's painted white, and it's a nice big blank wall for it. And so there's going to be a little film loop running there of some crazy stuff. And yeah, they're extremely, extremely supportive. I love it.
That's great to hear. That sounds really cool about the film projections and really everything that's going on. Um, I'll just kind of wrap up here with just a couple of questions I think you normally ask guests on your show. Are you involved with any other film, groups in the area that you see as, that kind of help complement the work you're doing with the festival or just on your own?
I'm not involved with any film groups, but I'm involved with other filmmakers. We have some other filmmakers local who are we've got a couple of Hollywood filmmakers. I've got some really good friends who are actually in the Wilmington area who are from Hollywood, and the wife was actually a judge in the first year that we had the film festival here, and they came up and visited. Very cool folks. Um, let's see, I my wife and I started a film scholarship this year. We announced it at the festival. It's a $500 scholarship for young filmmakers. It's called the Down East Youth Film Scholarship, and it's $500, 25 and under. Age 25 and under can apply, so there's no bottom age. I suppose if a 3-year-old got a camera and filled out the paperwork, they could submit a film, and then it's going to be judged not by me, but by a panel of people that we choose to give the award. And what I have done is I have asked people if they want to donate to the fund. It's through the Bank of the Arts. It's not to me. It's not for profit. So, excuse me, it's tax deductible. And let's say I get 10 people who donate $50 each. Well, that's another scholarship. For every $500 that they get, we're going to make another award. So instead of just one award, if we get enough money, 3, 4, 5, 10, however many $500 scholarships we can get, we'll give those as well. And the bonus is whoever gets that award gets to show their film in the film festival. So there's no competition for it. They just get to show it, and then it's, that's kind of a bonus.
Yeah.
And they'll get to talk at the festival. So
That's wonderful. That's a great initiative. I'll just ask if there's anything you can share, if you're working on any upcoming projects. I imagine aside from probably recuperating from the film festival now that that's over, but once
yeah.
that's maybe in the rearview mirror, at least, is there anything you can share about any projects that you're working on?
Yeah, I've got several I'm working on. One is because I love black and white. One is it's a series. And I think I have all the people now. I've got props and everything for it to get started. It's called Shmata, which in Yiddish means rag. And it's a term that's a little bit derogatory towards a person. But the person who is the Shmata in this, he's kind of this Charlie Chaplin type character. And we have his costume and everything. And of course, he's kind of a hapless, misguided fellow who, gets into all these weird situations that he really shouldn't be in most of the time. And that's the one I'm really trying to get kicked off. There's another one that I'm working on called La Vie en Plastique. And I don't want to give too much of that away, but that one is also a series that's also experimental in scope, I guess, but a little more narrative, but it has some elements of experimentation in it. So those are the two big things that I need to get kicked off. Plus, I have a friend who has written several scripts, and I think she wants us, her husband and I, to get busy on producing a couple of those because she's had them around for a while. So I keep looking up here because I have the folders are full of her scripts that we need to go through. They're all short, 5 minutes or under, but still, it takes a lot of prep. Whether it's a feature length film or a 5 minute film, it takes a lot of prep. So
Yeah. Well,
anyway, that's what's going on.
that's great. It sounds like exciting projects in the works. Very last thing, if there's a website or other online, you know, online places that you want to mention people to find your work, I'll certainly put the links in the description of this video. But if there's anything, if you want to mention it, um, please go ahead.
Oh, sure. Vimeo.com/Ken Hess. You can see my films there. My YouTube channel, I think YouTube, and my channel name is Ken Hess 61, Ken Hess 61. And then, gosh, what else? Experimentalfilm.info is the podcast, and then experimentalfilmfest.com is for the festival. Of course, the best place to see the most updated information is on Film Freeway, the Experimental Film Fest, and I think that's correct. With the
I believe
Experimental
so.
Film Fest.
I'll make sure to put the links in the
Uh,
description so everybody can find them. And
it's just filmfreeway.com/experimental film fest. Sorry.
there we go. All right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, make sure we have the links here for everybody to get directly to those pages. And I just want to say again, I really encourage anybody listening to this to please go check out uh, Ken's podcast, the Experimental Film Podcast. Like I said, I've been enjoying it. I listen to it every night when I'm at the gym. I find the conversations fascinating. Um, and Ken, thank you for speaking with me on here and for everything that you're doing to support experimental film. I think it's great. I had a pleasure talking with you tonight, and I hope that we can keep in touch and even reconnect on here at some point if you have more projects to talk about or anything else you'd like to discuss.
Sure. Great. Thank you, Matt. It was great.